Hey guys, Lex here again with another Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree video. This time I want to take a closer look at the two new crossbows that were added with the DLC. I'm of course talking about the Spread Crossbow and the Repeating Crossbow. Now if you've been watching my live streams or have seen my Greatsword of Solitude build video, you know that I greatly prefer the Spread Crossbow over the Repeating. But was I too hasty in my assessment? Now that I've had time to test both of them, I wanted to give you my more accurate opinion on which one I think is better, but also to compare them to a classic, the Pulley Crossbow. I feel like a disclaimer is needed here, but this is mostly for PvE. I didn't build or respec around either of these crossbows to maximize their damage or anything. I'm still a strength melee main, still using the Greatsword of Solitude, but since that weapon lacks a way to apply status effects, I'm basically seeing which one of these serves as the best support weapon for applying things like bleed or frostbite. All three of these crossbows do a decent job of that, but let's see which one does it the best. First up, we have the Spread Crossbow. Let's go over some of the pros and cons for this one. For pros, this is what we got. Shoots 10 shots instantly. Could be a con, but we're looking for fast status buildup, so potentially this is a good thing. Shorter animation time with shooting and reloading. This is mostly a comparison to Repeating Crossbow's Ash of War. What I mean by this is that you're able to react and dodge roll like right after shooting, before reloading, so it's a little more flexible. You can play a little more defensively and reactively with this thing. Can pull off status effects in roughly 2 to 3 shots, sometimes 1 at maximum application. What I mean by maximum application is basically point blank, so that most, all the bolts that can hit the target are hitting the target. But yeah, in my experience, I've only seen frostbite proc in the single shot, but it obviously depends on the enemy and the boss that you're fighting and their resistances. Overall, it's pretty rare. Alright, so some cons to this weapon are the ammo drain. Somewhat related to the 10 shots thing, it's usually 2 to 3 shots for a status application, like I said earlier, and it's nice, but this means 20 to 30 bolts spent for that. That's around a fifth or a third of the specific bolt type that you're using, and when mobs or bosses gain status resistance after that first proc, it will take even more ammo to shoot. It's a huge ammo drain, and it's pretty common to run out of ammo pretty early on in a lot of boss fights. Bolts will inevitably miss with the shotgun nature of this weapon. It needs to be used at pretty close range. I mean, maximum effectiveness is going to be point blank, mid-range at most. However, even at point blank, some of the bolts are going to miss. As I mentioned in my previous Greatsword of Solitude build video, there seems to be a hard cap on the amount of bolts that actually land on your targets to keep this weapon on a leash of some sort. I think FromSoft saw that it would be a little too overpowered if all 10 bolts would land. It would just be so much status buildup and so much damage very quickly. But ultimately, regardless of distance, because the bolts spread when they are fired, there is inevitably inconsistency with the status buildup. Even at point blank, I've seen variants of the status buildup, especially on a moving target. This is a no-brainer, but having to use this at such close range is often more dangerous, even with the ability to react after a single shot or a reload. That's just how it is. Alright, so what about the Repeating Crossbow? Some pros are, can often apply status effects in one 12-bolt volley, rather than the 20 or 30 needed by the Spread Crossbow, so there's better bolt consumption there when looking to apply status effects. It is quite accurate, so it can be done at a much further range than the Spread Crossbow, and from safety as long as you time it right. And this might be a weird one, but you also have the option to shoot it like a regular crossbow with a single bolt. The Spread does not have this option. It only shoots 10 at a time no matter what, so you can't really use the Spread Crossbow to pull an enemy from a distance or anything. You're just going to shoot the 10 shots every time. Alright, so the cons. Its rapid fire capability is tied to its weapon art, so you have to two-hand this thing in order to use it, which can lead to some awkwardness in fights. If you're trying to switch back to two-hand your sword, you basically have to switch from two-handing the Repeating Crossbow to one-handing both weapons and then two-handing your Greatsword, which costs you more time and will ultimately cost you more health. Next, it has a tall resource demand. Sure, it consumes 12 bolts instead of the 20 to 30 the Spread Crossbow does when you're trying to apply statuses, but we're talking 24 FP, the vast majority of your stamina drained every time you want to use this thing. It is rough. On top of that, it is a long animation to pull off. You're stuck in a significantly long animation, almost 4 seconds, while shooting the string of 12 bolts and then resetting whatever the mechanism is that just loosed them. Yeah, you can walk slowly while performing the weapon art, but I mean, it's no dodge roll, so that little bit of mobility isn't really going to make or break you avoiding an attack usually. As a smaller con, this also weighs 1 more than the Spread Crossbow at 6 weights, so that means you may have to adjust your endurance a bit or your build slightly if you want to use this one over the other. Alright, so how do these two compare to the classic, the Pulley Crossbow? The pros are, can shoot from a longer distance when compared to the Spread Crossbow. This is basically the same pro as the Repeating Crossbow, because it shoots 3 bolts in a line every time it's fired. Its effectiveness is not tied to an Ash of War, which is similar to the pro of the Spread Crossbow. Its regular attacks are what do the status buildup, and obviously you can roll and react between attacking and reloading, and it's also quite light. It's a weight of 4 instead of the Spread Crossbow's 5 or Repeating Crossbow's 6. It's just important to mention because this allows for a tiny bit of build flexibility when it comes to weight load load requirements. All right, cons are stamina usage per shot, though definitely not as bad as the Repeating Crossbow's Ash of War. It is slightly worse than the Spread Crossbow's shot. You might have to be a little bit more aggressive for the status buildup, but this is a very strong might. You'll see later why. I think that's it. Those are the only two cons I can think of. There are likely a couple of pros and or cons that you may think that I missed, but these are basically the bigger points that stand out to me. If you guys have something you want to add, again, let me know in the comments, but generally these are the weapon's strengths and weaknesses. All right, so the big question, which one is actually better at applying status effects? I ran a few different tests starting out with some land squirts in Liurnia and Caelid for the more controlled ones, but also some endgame level boss battles in both the base game and the DLC just to test their practicality. The results were interesting and perhaps a tad disappointing. You'll see why. So in testing these weapons on land squirts, you can see here that the Spread Crossbow is able to proc bleed on these things in 2 hits. Seems decent, though that is 20 bolts gone, so potentially you are getting bursty, high status effect buildup, but trading bolt consumption efficiency for it. Impressively, this was able to frostbite them in 1 shot, so only 10 bolts consumed there, which can only be better than the Repeating Crossbow in this case. Speaking of which, the Repeating Crossbow is able to proc bleed and frostbite in 1 volley of the Ash of War, which isn't surprising. It's pretty much what we all expected, but again, you cannot ignore the massive stamina drain and FP cost of this Ash of War, along with having to two-hand this weapon. It just feels clunky, and to pull this off in a boss fight while landing every bolt is a very tall order. All right, so how does the Pulley Crossbow perform? For bleeding, it takes 2 shots. 2 shots. That's 6 bolts spent, and the bleed even procced on the first shot of the second burst. Right now, that's seeming very hard to beat. That is some efficient bolt consumption and status effect buildup per bolt. So frostbite occurs in 1 shot, 3 bolts. Guys, 1 shot, 3 bolts. So, proccing bleed with 6 bolts and 2 shots is seemingly a lot better than 12 bolts in a 5-second long Ash of War or 20 bolts in 2 shots. And even better with the frostbite application here. The actual number damage here is a bit lower because the Pulley Crossbow is unupgraded, but yeah. So that's interesting, but also a little disheartening. This base game crossbow is better at applying status effects than the 2 new crossbows added in the DLC. How practical are all of these weapons during a boss fight? You can probably tell. If you're with a group, the Repeating Crossbow is usable, but god, good luck trying to get that Ash of War off as a solo. It's just too cumbersome to two-hand the thing, go through the animations of loading it, shooting it, then cocking it again, lose all that FP and stamina, etc. I really want to love this weapon for obvious berserk reasons, but from a numbers perspective, it just ain't it. The Spread Crossbow I still like a little more, and in my opinion is actually better than the Pulley Crossbow in PvP as well. I don't know if they're ever going to nerf those sleep bolt shenanigans, but at least those bolts are hard to farm, or I guess you could just dupe them if you want to, you know, break the law. But overall, the status buildup and bolt usage ratio is super crap and it's not consistent. You'll often waste a third or more of a specific ammo type just trying to pull off the status effect that you want. I hate to say it guys, but the base game Pulley Crossbow is the clear winner here by a large margin. It applies status effects quicker, respects your ammo stores, not even the ammo in storage. I'm talking about the 198 you are limited to carrying on your character. It's usable at a safer range, does not have an insane stamina, FP drain, etc. When it comes down to it, it just applies so much more status effect per bolt than the other crossbows, which really just makes sense and feels right shooting things during those windows of opportunity when enemies are recovering from an animation or something. Basically what I'm trying to say is when you see the moment that you should shoot, you don't have to sit there and think about these extra steps with the Spread Crossbow or Repeating Crossbow, you know, like, oh, am I close enough for this to be effective? Or, oh, do I have enough time and FP and stamina to pull off this ridiculously costly Ash of War? The Pulley Crossbow just flows more naturally in a fight when you see a punish window. As much as I want to love the new DLC crossbows as a status effect offhand, the Pulley is just too good. It essentially has the best parts of both DLC crossbows in one weapon. It has the range, accuracy, rapidity of the Repeating Crossbow, and the bursty, non-Ash of War shooting of the Spread Crossbow. And there you have it. It's unfortunate that FromSoft added these 2 new crossbows that have some awesome flavor, but they set up these guardrails that are far too narrow to let them really shine in the game. I mean, hey, I'm not telling you can't beat guts and machine gun bosses with a Repeating Crossbow. Please, by all means, go ahead. It's just if you care about the numbers of what makes the most sense, it's gotta be the Pulley Crossbow. I can see a world where the Repeating Crossbow and the Spread Crossbow might shine if you try to lean into their higher base damage. They both have significantly higher base damage than the Pulley Crossbow. There might be a build out there where you stack the right talismans and you can deal like a high amount of physical damage or perhaps elemental damage with those 2. I mean, this is pure theory crafting at this point, but I do wonder if that's a better route for those 2. But when it comes to bleeding and freezing, it's gotta be the Pulley Crossbow. That's gonna be it for this video, guys. Till next time.